What's up, gamers? A couple of days ago, I made a lengthy post on Twitter detailing my struggles with the freshly buffed Kathari units. Now it's time to come with some solutions. Now, I tried both the Gnaeus and Scipius Paragons without a lot of success for either. In the lower ranks, it seems to me that Gnaeus can be viable, as my friend and fellow creator, Moneyplane Idol, has recently seen some success, but he did point out it was mostly against gold ranked and below. Scipius isn't impossible to win with, but it still struggles a lot, especially against top competitors. I'm playing it primarily for research and for the content, but like many others, I also bought a full NFT deck during the early Scipius meta, and I didn't actually even get a chance to play one game with it before they got nerfed. So I've put a lot of thought into how we can improve Kathari and at least make it viable in the Diamond and Master ranks. And to be clear, I don't think any of these changes would actually shift the meta, but they would make Kathari competitive again. Today, I'm going to present 4 solutions that solve the Kathari problem. First, we give it some of the missing tools. Second, a unique buff for Magna Tempest's Will. Third, we fix Scipius's passive ability. And fourth, and my most favorite solution, clone zombies. You heard me right. Now, Kathari is missing a bunch of stuff. They don't have a single unit that natively has Defender. The only way to get a Defender is from an effect seeing triple. It also has very few muster effects, which is a problem for Scipius because his ability is to re-trigger muster effects. It has very little card draw natively as well, and the Mournful Delta doesn't really work. It also has no units that allow for trading upon entry. This is typically done by destroying a unit on entry or dealing some damage on muster. The reality is only Magna, which is a legendary card, has any of these things, and you can only play one copy of Magna. So we really could solve the problem in kind of a boring way by making Kathari a little bit more similar to some of the other parallels and giving it some of these things that it is missing. So I've come up with some fun examples that are minor changes to the current cards, but that would add some of this into the mix. The Cunning Scipion, we give it a new and changed ability. Its muster, it now has a muster effect, create a 1/1 Kathari iterant. And then it also has, at the start of your turn, create a 1/1 Kathari iterant. Now, none of these iterants attack any sooner and they're not bigger, so things have changed very little with this adjustment. However, now it's creating an iterant on muster, and Scipius can re-trigger that muster and create another 1/1 later on. That's minorly helpful. And then it also helps a little bit because the 1/1 iterant is available on a turn sooner for sacrifice purposes. So if you have a squad trader or a Hydralisk chamber, you can use that as a source of units to sacrifice. A little bit more useful than it used to be, but essentially the same card. We could change the Mournful Delta so that its ability now reads, after any unit is destroyed or banished, draw a card. Currently, it is very difficult to get any card draw from the Mournful Delta. The only reliable way to do it is on turn 4 or later when you have the energy, you play Mournful Delta, and then you trade some of your units. That only comes up some of the time, and it requires you giving up a bunch of your units. It's not the most effective way for the card to work. And even worse than that, Shroud has an artifact called Paradox. It is a very cool relic for 1 energy that allows them to banish any destroyed unit. And honestly, that is a 1 energy card that completely counters Mournful Delta, which is a 4 energy unit. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So let's make it so that Banish still triggers the effect, And let's make it so that when the Mournful Delta dies, it also gets a card draw. That way you're at least getting something from your Mournful Delta every time that you play it. We could also change the Reliant Gamma. Today, he has 2 attack that helps a little bit, but the reality is with 1 health, he just never ever lasts. Ever. The only time he is useful is late game when you've got lots of units and he is no longer the most important one to kill first or second. That's the only way that it really sticks. In the early game, it just dies. But if we change it so that it is a 1/1 defender, then it gets to be a lot more useful. So my suggestion is Reliant Gamma becomes a 1/1 with Defender. At the start of your turn, if you control another friendly clone, this unit gains +0/+1. The attack buff really did nothing to make Gamma more useful. He either needs a buff at the end of the turn or he needs 2 health. This is kind of a fun third alternative. Life would still be a little bit annoying for your opponents if they don't have an easy way to remove the Reliant Gamma. They're still going to have lots and lots of easy ways to remove it because it's only a 1/1, but now that it's a defender, it could at least potentially protect something else, and it still becomes an annoying card later on without being overpowered if it does somehow last the turn. Honestly, keeping the full +1/+1 buff would be a lot more fun for the Reliant Gamma, but I think that's probably too much from a 1 energy card. Alternatively, if you don't like that change for the Reliant Gamma, we could tweak the Valerusi cohorts. It gets an ability change in this case, and it now reads, at the start of your turn, if you don't control a Naeus Vanguard, create a 2/2 Naeus Vanguard with Defender. So instead of attacking immediately, which is fun, but not really quite as useful, the Valerosi cohorts can produce a defender instead. This is a minor adjustment, wouldn't do a whole lot to balance, but at least gives us another avenue to get a defender for Kathari and hopefully be a little bit more viable in the mid-game. Solution number 2, a unique buff for Magna, Tempest's Will. Now, Magna is a legendary card, and rightfully so, but that's also kind of the problem. If we could play 3 Magnas in our deck, a lot of Kathari's problems would actually be solved. I ask myself, though, is 3 Magnas too much? And the comparison I like to do is 3 Mizras, because in my opinion, Mizra for a relatively common card is pretty game-breaking. The fact that it buffs copies of cards that are not even involved in the game yet, and the cost doesn't go up, is just wicked, wicked, wicked. I don't think that 3 Magnas in your deck would actually be worse and harder to deal with for your opponents than 3 Mizras are. And so I don't think that this really breaks the game. It's not like she can reliably trigger all 3 of her muster abilities anyways. She requires some setup for that. She also requires the player to remember the setup because there's no indicator in the game that you're going to get all 3 of them off. But if you had 3 copies in there, it wouldn't be such a big deal to play it when you're only getting 1 of those abilities, and that would be really, really cool. However, allowing 2 or 3 copies of a legendary card is problematic from a supply standpoint because she was created as a legendary card. It has the supply of a legendary card. If we just did this alone, it would balloon her cost, and that would be problematic for sure. So instead, let's give her a little miniature version of the Multifold Keys ability, where owning just 1 copy, whether it's an NFT or an apparition, allows you to play up to 3 copies of Magna in your Kathari deck. The NFT copy would, of course, have to count as up to 3 NFT copies in your deck, and the apparition copy would count for up to 3 apparition copies in your deck as well. But this kind of solves the problem. It's unique, and I don't know from a coding perspective how difficult something like that might be, but if this is something that could be implemented, I really, really like this idea. Now, I don't think that that is too strong to be implemented as I suggested. But if the team really does think that it is too strong, but likes the idea otherwise, I have a slightly nerfed suggestion. We could also add that each time Magna is played and triggers all 3 of the abilities, she loses one of those abilities on all of the other copies of her card. This means that she gets a little bit weaker each time that you do that, so it prevents you from potentially getting off 3 Magnas where you get all 3 of the muster abilities, which again, I don't think that that is crazier than Mizra by itself, but it would still be an interesting way to approach this issue. The third solution is to fix Scipius Magna's Alpha's passive. The reality is that changing it from a 1/1 adjutant to a 0/1 adjutant was killer. A 1/1 to 0/1 is so much worse than just losing 1 attack point. A 0/1 is only situationally useful because an attack of 0 does nothing. In some situations, the 0/1 can get buffed and become useful. In other situations, it can be sacrificed to trigger an ability, and that is useful also. But often, you can't do anything with it on that turn. And this is really problematic because Scipius's passive ability is already situational in its own right. That's right. Many people forget, but Scipius needs you to bank a unit to create the token. And because of that, you can't put too many non-unit cards into your deck. Otherwise, you're going to be caught in all sorts of situations where you don't have a unit to bank to create a unit. The solution to this problem is very simple. Remove 1 layer of situational factors. Now, the easy and boring way to do that is to simply remove the unit requirement from banking. If they let us bank whatever we want, the deck building for Scipius becomes a lot simpler, and playing or including more effects or universal units is a lot less painful. But if I'm being honest with myself, narratively, the banking unit requirement makes a lot of sense to me, and I kind of like that condition. So let's look at some other options as well. We can make the adjutants not situational instead. To do this, it has to be able to do something without any help at all. A 1/1 can definitely do something, but a 0/1 cannot. However, a 0/1 defender would at least be kind of fun. It can at least protect you from some face damage or muck up your opponent's trading plans. You could also add an aftermath ability that does something small so that when the adjutant is destroyed, you get something from it. Something like dealing 1 damage to an enemy target would be neat. We could draw a card when it gets destroyed. Even revealing a enemy's banked card is something and potentially sets up another card later on in the game. That would make it so that the 0/1 can always at least achieve something for you, and the fact that you have to bank a unit to get it is not as big of a deal. But I have glossed over the most obvious solution to this problem, and that is to simply give us the 1/1 adjutant back. Now, I know what a bunch of you guys are thinking. If you were playing Parallel back in the first month of beta, then you know that the Scipius meta was way too dominant, and I don't think we should go back to that. That's not what I'm suggesting. The reality, though, is that a lot of other things changed at the same time that the adjutants changed, and there have been additional balancing since then. This is not the same game that we were in month 1. Back then, the ideal Scipius opening had Nucleotic Synthesizer, a banked unit to produce a 1/1, and then playing an Artifact Appraiser, which would get buffed to 3/3. A 3/3 and a 1/1 plus the deck's most important relic being played all on turn 1. Way too much. But they also made the Nucleotic Synthesizer 1 energy instead of 0, which means it's not even the ideal turn 1 relic for Scipius anymore, and so it's effectively removed from the combo. True, you could add it in later on, but it's not nearly as big a deal when you aren't getting all of that all at once on the very first turn. So the Nucleotic Synthesizer probably not even going to be in most Scipius decks, if I'm being honest. Even more importantly than that, the Artifact Appraiser is now a 3/2 unit, which is easy to counter. Everybody has PS8s in their deck. It's a common card. It's played constantly. It's already a must-have card because of all of the Markolians out there. I just don't think that a 3/2 Artifact Appraiser on turn 1 is a big problem. And in fact, I know that that's the case because Skippy can get a 3/2 Artifact Appraiser on turn 1 right now. It's just not a play that's very viable because it's so easily countered and digs a big hole when it is. And when I think about playing against all sorts of different parallels with this type of a deck, I just don't see really any spots where it's a big problem. If our Kathari units could stick around for even just one turn longer than they currently do, things shift quite a bit. We are in an early game meta, and even with the recent buffs, Kathari units just don't stick long enough for their abilities to have a real impact on the game. They need some protection, but instead of giving them lane shields, which make a lot more sense in Augencore than they would with Kathari, or making it so that they can't be targeted, which really doesn't have any sort of narrative explanation with the current cards, I think it would be a lot more interesting if we introduced clone zombies. Now, maybe I just watched too much Star Wars, but I think that clones and zombies go together really, really nicely and actually aren't that different from each other in a lot of respects. So essentially what I'm proposing with clone zombies is some really, really interesting aftermath abilities that create a weaker version of the clone that was just destroyed, hence the zombie nature. They also don't last very long, but they will extend the usefulness of the original unit so that Kathari can compete a little bit better in the early and mid game. Let's take a look at a couple of examples because I think that that will make things make a lot more sense. Very first is the Valerusi Standard Bearer, and to be very, very clear, none of these cards are changing. We are just adding this additional aftermath ability to each of them. So for the Valerusi Standard Bearer, we add aftermath. Create a Valerusi Standard Bearer zombie 0/2 unit with the ability, when another friendly clone enters the field, it gains +1/+0. At the start of your turn, Valerusi Standard Bearer zombie loses 1 health. So the zombie is relatively easy to remove for your opponent, similar to Ranksy. When you destroy whatever it's copied, it becomes a 1/1. That's pretty easy to take care of, but you have to do it to remove the entire ability of the Valerusi Standard Bearer. If the zombie clone sticks, then it's not very threatening for your opponent because it's not going to do any attack damage and it's going to die after being used for just one more turn, but it allows you to generate a +1/+0 buff still, which means that the adjutants are 1/1s and other units you play get a small buff, not the full buff, but something, and then the zombie goes away the next turn. Similar with the Cunning Scipion, we add aftermath. Create Cunning Scipion zombie, a 0/1 unit with the ability, at the end of your turn, create a 0/1 Kathari iterant. So again here, same thing. If you get your Cunning Scipion gets killed, you now get a token version of the Cunning Scipion that is clearly weaker, but it's still doing something for you. Similarly with the Aeacian Subjugate, add aftermath. Create Aeacian Subjugate zombie, a 1/2 unit with the ability, when another friendly clone enters the field, target clone gains +1/+0. At the start of your turn, Aeacian Subjugate zombie loses 1 health. So similar to the Standard Bearer, it sticks around for 1 additional turn. It does half of its buff instead of the full buff, and it becomes a lot less threatening as an attacker. And then finally, the Drusian Exhorator. Add aftermath. Create Drusian Exhorator zombie, a 2/3 unit with the ability, other friendly clones have +1/+1. At the start of your turn, Drusian Exhorator zombie loses 1 health. So the Drusian Accelerator is a little bit bigger of a card. It will last. The zombie version will last for 2 turns on its own without any additional help, and its buff gets smaller as well, but still sticks on the board. Now, if the team were to actually go this route, you have to be very, very careful because this could easily become game-breaking. Some spots to watch out for: low energy units like the Cunning Scipion, the Valorusi Standard Bearer, they have to create a 0 attack clone zombie, otherwise Neas decks immediately become totally overpowered. The idea here is that they lose some of their attack ability, but they keep some of their abilities on the board so that they're not totally crushing the game, but still have some ability to contribute after they get removed. And that wraps up my Kathari solutions video. I want to be very, very clear here. Number one, if anybody on the team is seriously considering some of these ideas, please don't implement more than one of them at a time. I think that as standalone ideas, they all work, but if you start combining things, then Kathari is going to get too overpowered really, really quickly. But I do think that a lot of these things are worth trying. Some of them are very easy to implement and potentially could be done for Monday or the Monday after, and we could see if this helps at all. The other thing is that the reality is that these are just ideas I came up with. I am not on the team. I am certain at least one person from Parallel will listen to this and receive these ideas, but the reality is probably none of this is coming. I simply wanted to highlight for everybody that the problems Kathari is having are solvable, and that I have full confidence that the team is going to get there. They haven't done it yet, but they are getting closer, and I think some of these ideas, and probably there's a lot more other creative ideas out there as well, can really get Kathari to a much more viable place in the current meta for Parallel. And doing so will make the game a lot better. The biggest problem that I have with Parallel today is that there's just not a lot of variety in my opponents. I'm facing Lemieux decks, I'm facing Juggernaut Workshop decks, and I'm facing a handful of Earthen decks, and then once in a while I find a poor soul like myself that's also still running Kathari, but it's just a little bit boring facing the same things over and over again. I know Planetfall expansion is going to really, really help that problem quite a bit, but the fact of the matter is, if it doesn't make a lot more Paragons and Parallels viable, then we're just going to have a new version of the same problem. Thanks for hanging with me. This was a long but fun video to put together. If you found this fun and entertaining, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It really helps support the channel and just takes 1 second out of your day.